In March 2024, workers digging foundations for a new shopping mall in Wrocław, Poland hit concrete 6 meters under the street. What they found wasn't a wartime air raid shelter like city planners thought. It was a sealed command bunker holding the skeleton of a Wehrmacht officer still wearing his Iron Cross, a loaded Luger pistol by his side, and a leather logbook full of entries from April 1945. The ID tag said Oberst Heinrich Vogel, last officially seen in Berlin on April 16, 1945, which was 800 kilometers away. Military records showed Vogel commanded the 347th Infantry Regiment's rear units during Berlin's final defense. His family got told he died in the Battle of Berlin and was buried in a mass grave. For 80 years, everyone believed that story. But the bunker in Wrocław was telling something completely different. How did a senior Wehrmacht officer who was supposedly defending Hitler's capital end up sealed inside a Polish command post? What pushed him nearly 500 miles from his assigned position during the war's final days? And why was the bunker entrance deliberately collapsed from the outside? Stay with us to discover why Oberst Vogel was found 500 miles from where he should have died. Feel free to drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We read every single one. If these forgotten histories matter to you, hit that like button. It helps us keep doing this work. And consider subscribing if you want to catch our future investigations. Now let's go back to April 1945, when the Third Reich had just days left. The sealed bunker in Wrocław had preserved way more than just remains. It held answers to a mystery nobody even knew existed. By April 1945, the Third Reich was facing extinction from 2 directions at once. Soviet forces had crossed the Oder River and were standing 40 kilometers from Berlin's eastern edges. From the west, American and British armies pushed across the Ruhr while the German war machine fell apart into scattered defensive pockets. The Wehrmacht, once 3 million strong on the Eastern Front, had shrunk to undermanned units of exhausted veterans. Strategic planning had dissolved into desperate local actions as communication networks failed and command authority broke down. Heinrich Vogel entered military service in 1934, commissioned as a lieutenant in the 23rd Infantry Regiment. His service record showed he was competent but not brilliant. Steady promotions through company and battalion command, brief service in France in 1940, then transferred to the Eastern Front where he led infantry battalions through the grinding campaigns of 1942 and 1943. In January 1944, he got promoted to Oberst and assigned to the 347th Infantry Regiment, a reserve unit handling rear area security and supply line protection. By 1945, the 347th barely existed on paper. Its combat battalions had been stripped away to reinforce frontline units. Vogel commanded what was left, which meant administrative personnel, supply depots, and a small security detachment in Berlin-Spandau. The situation Vogel faced in April 1945 looked nothing like military operations in any normal sense. Berlin's defense got organized into rings with the Reichstag at the center. The outer ring, called the Außenring, ran along the city's edge and consisted of hastily prepared positions manned by whoever could hold a weapon. Vogel's job didn't include frontline combat. His orders, issued April 10th by General Helmuth Weidling's LVI Panzer Corps headquarters, told him to keep managing supply distribution to units defending the Spandau sector and prepare administrative records for destruction if evacuation became necessary. The 347th's surviving personnel numbered about 200 men, mostly clerks, supply sergeants, and drivers. The city itself had turned into a maze of rubble from months of Allied bombing. The Spandau district, where Vogel kept his headquarters in a converted warehouse, had suffered massive damage from February raids. Supply lines worked sporadically at best. The Reichsbahn railway system had been reduced to isolated segments. Road movement happened mainly at night to avoid air attack. Civilians packed into basements and subway tunnels. The administrative machinery of the Reich kept functioning through pure bureaucratic momentum even as its purpose vanished. Officers still filed reports, processed transfer orders, and maintained personnel records while Soviet artillery crept closer every day. Communication between military units had degraded so badly that field telephone lines were the main reliable way to send orders, and those lines got cut constantly by bombing. Radio communications suffered from equipment failures, lack of spare parts, and increasingly effective Soviet jamming. Motorcycle couriers were the last resort option, but many never completed their deliveries as roads became impassable or fell under enemy fire. Inside this collapsing command structure, individual officers often made decisions based on incomplete information, contradictory orders, or simple survival instinct. The line between authorized military movement and desertion had become dangerously blurred. Vogel's final entries in official regimental logs appeared on April 10, 1945. These documents, preserved in German Federal Military Archives in Freiburg, recorded routine administrative stuff. Authorization for 3 soldiers to transfer to a Volkssturm battalion, approval of emergency rations, distribution to a signals unit, and a note about incoming wounded needing medical evacuation. At 2,230 hours that evening, he signed a receipt for classified documents delivered by courier from LVI Panzer headquarters. The receipt had his signature and the official stamp of the 347th Infantry Regiment. After that notation, Oberst Heinrich Vogel disappeared from the Wehrmacht paper trail. On April 16th, Soviet forces launched their final assault on Berlin. The 1st Belarusian Front under Marshal Georgy Zhukov attacked from the east, while the 1st Ukrainian Front under Marshal Ivan Konev struck from the south. Artillery bombardment began at 0500 hours with an intensity witnesses said transformed night into day. Over 20,000 artillery pieces fired on German positions along a front stretching from the Baltic coast to the Neisse River. In Berlin itself, the barrage shattered windows 5 kilometers from the nearest impact zones. The ground shook continuously. The systematic destruction of the city's outer defenses had started. At the 347th Infantry Regiment's headquarters in Spandau, chaos took over quickly. Surviving testimony from Hauptmann Otto Krebs, Vogel's adjutant, described the morning of April 16th as total confusion with contradictory orders and communication breakdown. Krebs testified during a light interrogation in July 1945 that orders arrived at 0630 hours, telling regiment supply personnel to evacuate westward toward Noen. 30 minutes later, a contradictory message from Corps headquarters ordered all units to hold positions and defend in place. A third message at 0745 hours directed Vogel to report immediately to General Weidling's command post for reassignment. Krebs said Vogel left the headquarters around 0815 hours, taking his aide, Lieutenant Franz Kessler, and his driver, Jeffreiter Paul Becker. They traveled in Vogel's staff car, a requisitioned Opel Capitan, carrying Vogel's personal kit and map case. Krebs testified he never saw Vogel again. When communication with Corps headquarters became impossible later that day because telephone lines got cut, Krebs took command of what remained of the regiment and began evacuation procedures. He led survivors westward on April 18th, eventually surrendering to British forces near Hamburg on May 3rd. In his formal statement, Krebs said he believed Vogel died trying to reach Weidling's headquarters, which had relocated multiple times as Soviet forces pushed into Berlin's eastern districts. Given the chaos of urban combat and the thousands of casualties during those final days, Krebs figured his commander's death was basically inevitable. The Wehrmacht personnel system, collapsing under the weight of military disaster, recorded Vogel as killed in action on April 16, 1945. Location unknown, body unrecovered. But Lieutenant Kessler's field diary, discovered in 1987 among family papers and donated to the Bundesarchiv, told a way more complex story. Kessler's final entries, written in pencil with an increasingly shaky hand, documented a journey that made absolutely no military sense. The entry for April 16th around 1100 hours said this: August diverted southeast on Wilhelmstrasse. States priority orders supersede Corps' summons. Becker questions route. Oberst insists. At 1430 hours, now traveling east beyond defensive perimeter. Soviet patrols visible. August refuses to explain destination. The entry for April 17th at 0230 hours simply read, "Crossed into Silesia, God help us." The diary's final entry, dated April 18th with no time noted, consisted of a single sentence. "Reached Breslau facility, Oberst has specific objective, too late to turn back now." The official Wehrmacht casualty lists compiled by the Deutsche Dienststelle in the months following. Germany's surrender recorded Heinrich Vogel among approximately 80,000 military personnel killed in the Battle of Berlin. His wife, Margarethe, received notification in September 1945 while living with relatives in Heidelberg. The standard death notice provided no details beyond the date, April 16, 1945, and the classification killed in action. His body, the notice explained, could not be recovered or identified due to the scale of destruction. Margarethe accepted this explanation like she accepted thousands of other families' losses. The Third Reich had consumed an entire generation of German men. Her husband had simply joined the countless others whose remains lay beneath Berlin's rubble. The 347th Infantry Regiment's surviving records, fragmentary and incomplete, offered no answers. Most regimental documentation had been destroyed during the final evacuation, either burned deliberately to prevent capture or lost in the general chaos. The unit's war diary ended on April 14, 1945, with a notation about supply shortages. Hauptmann Krepp's post-surrender testimony to British interrogators in July 1945 repeated the assumption of Vogel's death during the battle. When questioned specifically about Vogel's final movements, Krepp stated the Oberst departed to report to Corps' headquarters as ordered. Communication collapsed immediately afterward. "I assumed he died in the fighting. Many officers died that week." British interrogators focused on higher-level command decisions and potential war crimes investigations, so they pursued the matter no further. However, fragmentary evidence began piling up almost immediately that contradicted the official account. In August 1945, Soviet military authorities in Berlin published a partial list of Wehrmacht officers whose identity documents had been recovered from casualties. The list, distributed through Red Cross channels to assist with casualty identification, did not include Heinrich Vogel, a more comprehensive Soviet. Accounting published in 1947, based on systematic examination of mass graves, similarly left out his name. For a Wehrmacht officer to die in Berlin without any documentary or physical trace was unusual but not impossible. Soviet forces had buried thousands of German dead in unmarked mass graves during and immediately after the battle. Yet the complete absence of any evidence began to trouble researchers decades later. Lieutenant Kessler's mother reported her son missing in May 1945. She filed inquiries with military authorities, the Red Cross, and prisoner of war registration offices. In 1948, after 3 years without contact, Jeff Reiter Becker's family received notification through Red Cross channels that he had died in Soviet captivity in February 1946 at a camp near Stalingrad, cause of death listed as typhus. But Kessler remained completely unaccounted for. His mother died in 1962 without learning her son's fate. When her estate was settled in 1987, relatives discovered Kessler's field diary among her papers. The diary's final entries describing travel into Silesia and arrival at Breslau facility sparked brief interest among military historians. But without additional context or supporting evidence, the diary raised more questions than it answered. What facility? Why would a Wehrmacht officer travel away from Berlin toward the collapsing Eastern Front during the war's final days? In 1989, historian Dr. Ernst Hoffmann published a study of Wehrmacht rear echelon units in Berlin's final defense. His research included interviews with surviving veterans and analysis of captured German documents in Soviet archives. Hoffmann noted several cases of officers whose official records indicated death in Berlin, but whose remains were never identified. He theorized that some officers, recognizing the hopelessness of continued resistance, may have attempted to flee westward toward American or British lines rather than face Soviet capture. This theory gained some support from documented cases of desertion and unauthorized movement during April 1945, but Hoffmann's research did not specifically address Heinrich Vogel's case, and the theory of westward flight contradicted Kessler's diary entries describing eastward movement into Soviet-controlled territory. Margarethe Vogel reconstructed her life slowly in the post-war years. She never remarried. She raised her two daughters, ages 14 and 11, in 1945, while working as a seamstress in Heidelberg. When asked about her husband, she repeated the same brief summary. He had been a career officer. He died defending Berlin. His body was never recovered. She kept one photograph on her bedroom dresser showing Heinrich in his dress uniform taken in 1942. Her daughters learned not to press for details. The war had claimed their father like it had claimed millions of others. For German families in the immediate post-war period, consumed by the challenges of survival in a devastated nation, dwelling on individual losses seemed almost self-indulgent when collective trauma was universal. The broader historical narrative that emerged during the 1950s and 1960s focused on major military operations, strategic decisions, and prominent commanders. Books about the Battle of Berlin examined Zhukov's assault, Weidling's defense, and Hitler's final days in the Vorbunker. Regimental histories of major combat formations documented final battles and casualty rates. But administrative units like the 347th Infantry Regiment attracted minimal scholarly attention. Reserve formations tasked with supply and security duties lacked the dramatic combat records that interested military historians or general readers. Vogel's disappearance, unknown to all but his immediate family and former comrades, remained buried within a larger statistical tragedy. Soviet authorities maintained tight control over former German territories incorporated into Poland after the war. Breslau, renamed Wrocław, underwent systematic reconstruction and demographic transformation. The German population, approximately 600,000 before the war, was expelled westward in 1945 and 1946. Polish settlers from territories annexed by the Soviet Union moved into the city. Wartime damage, extensive after months of siege warfare in early 1945, was cleared slowly. Many bunkers and fortifications were simply buried rather than demolished, covered with rubble and eventually forgotten as new construction proceeded above them. Warsaw Pact military restrictions limited Western access to the region throughout the Cold War. Systematic archaeological investigation of wartime sites remained effectively impossible until after 1989. In 1974, Margarethe Vogel died at age 68. Her daughters, both married with children of their own, sorted through her modest possessions. The photograph of Heinrich in uniform went to the eldest daughter, who placed it in a family album. A small collection of letters he had written from the Eastern Front in 1942 and 1943 was donated to the Bundesarchiv, private papers collection, where they joined thousands of similar donations from families documenting the war experience. One letter dated November 1943 mentioned in passing his hope that the madness would end before it consumes everything. Another from January 1944 described the cold of the Eastern Front with matter-of-fact weariness. The letters contained nothing remarkable, nothing that distinguished Heinrich Vogel from thousands of other Wehrmacht officers who endured the war's grinding brutality and then vanished into its final chaos, the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. And the subsequent collapse of the Warsaw Pact gradually opened former restricted areas to researchers and recovery teams. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, organizations like the German War Graves Commission conducted systematic searches for missing personnel. Battlefield archaeology emerged as a specialized field, combining historical research with forensic techniques. In Poland, urban development projects occasionally uncovered wartime artifacts, unexploded ordnance, sealed bunkers, and buried vehicles. Most discoveries followed predictable patterns, confirming known events or revealing details about documented battles. Nothing connected to Heinrich Vogel surfaced during these decades. His name appeared in no recovered documents. No witness came forward with information about his final days. His case remained closed, archived in the endless lists of those who died in Berlin, In April 1945 and November 2023, the Wrocław municipal government approved construction of a commercial complex on a development site in the Przedmieście Oławskie district, roughly 2 kilometers from the city center. Historical surveys conducted during the planning phase identified the location as a former Wehrmacht administrative area during the final months of German occupation. The site had contained warehouses and minor supply facilities, all destroyed during the Soviet siege of Breslau in February. Through May 1945, post-war clearance had removed surface rubble, and construction during the 1960s had established light industrial buildings that were eventually demolished. Ground-penetrating radar surveys in September 2023 indicated underground structures consistent with wartime bunkers, but municipal planners expected standard civilian air raid shelters common throughout the district. Excavation began in February 2024 under supervision of archaeologist Dr. Katarzyna Nowak from the University of Wrocław's Institute of Archaeology. Polish law requires archaeological monitoring of construction sites within zones of historical significance, particularly areas with documented wartime activity. During the first week of excavation, machinery removed approximately 4 meters of fill material consisting of post-war rubble, construction debris from the 1960s, and soil deposited during landscaping. On March 12, excavators encountered reinforced concrete at a depth of 6 meters. Initial assessment suggested a standard civilian shelter approximately 20 meters square, consistent with construction patterns from 1943 to 1944. Dr. Nowak ordered manual excavation to proceed, carefully to document the structure before construction continued. Work crews exposed the bunker's roof over the following week, revealing a structure more substantial than typical civilian shelters. The concrete was military grade, estimated at 40 centimeters thick, reinforced with steel bars in a pattern consistent with Wehrmacht engineering standards. On March 19th, workers uncovered an entrance shaft on the bunker's eastern side. The shaft descended at a 45-degree angle, but its lower section was completely filled with deliberately placed rubble and concrete fragments. Dr. Nowak halted excavation and contacted the Lower Silesian branch of the Institute of National Remembrance, the Polish government agency responsible for investigating wartime sites. The sealed entrance suggested this was not a civilian shelter, but a military installation potentially containing unexploded ordnance or human remains. A joint team from the Institute of National Remembrance and the University of Wrocław began careful excavation of the entrance shaft on March 26th. Workers removed rubble manually, documenting each layer. The fill material included concrete chunks from the bunker's own construction, broken bricks consistent with building materials used in 1940s Breslau, and fragments of wooden beams. Analysis of the fill's compaction and composition indicated the shaft had been deliberately blocked in a single operation, not gradually filled by natural collapse or post-war clearing. On April 2nd, excavators broke through into the bunker's interior chamber approximately 8 meters below current street level. The chamber measured approximately 15 meters long by 8 meters wide with a ceiling height of 2.5 meters. Battery-powered lighting revealed a scene frozen in time. The chamber contained military equipment, furniture, and supplies arranged as though its occupants had expected to return momentarily. 3 field desks stood along the northern wall, their surfaces covered with papers, maps, and personal items. Metal filing cabinets lined the eastern wall. A communication station with radio equipment occupied one corner, its vacuum tubes still mounted in their chassis. Most striking, however, were the human remains. Skeletal remains of 3 individuals lay in different locations within the chamber. One skeleton, partially collapsed, sat at the central desk, slumped forward with its skull resting on folded arms. Fabric remnants and metal insignia indicated a Wehrmacht officer's uniform. An Iron Cross First Class lay near the rib cage, still attached to deteriorated uniform material. A Luger PO-8 pistol rested on the desk surface within reach of the skeleton's right hand. Dr. Nowak immediately secured the site and contacted German authorities. as Polish law requires notification when German military remains are discovered. The German War Graves Commission dispatched a team to assist with recovery and identification. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Marcus Stein from the University of Munich joined the investigation on April 8th. Initial examination of the remains confirmed all three individuals had been dead since approximately 1945, based on uniform deterioration, patterns, and the absence of any post-war artifacts. Identity tags were found on 2 of the 3 skeletons. The central figure at the desk wore tags reading Vogel Heinrich Oberst, 347th Infantry Regiment. The second skeleton, discovered near the entrance shaft in what appeared to be a guard position, wore tags identifying Kessler Franz, Lieutenant, 347th Infantry Regiment. The third skeleton bore no identification. The recovery operation proceeded methodically over the following 3 weeks. Every item in the bunker was photographed in place, catalogued, and carefully removed for analysis. Dr. Stein supervised removal of the skeletal remains using standard forensic archaeological techniques. Each skeleton was documented, articulated as found, then disarticulated carefully with bones sorted and labeled. Fabric remnants adhering to bones were preserved separately for textile analysis. Metal objects like buttons, insignia, and belt buckles were removed with their spatial relationships recorded precisely. The entire chamber was mapped digitally using 3D scanning technology, creating a complete virtual record of the site as discovered. Analysis of Oberst Vogel's remains revealed a male approximately 175 centimeters tall, aged 45 to 50 at death, consistent with his known birth year of 1900. The skeleton showed evidence of healed fractures to the left, ulna, and right tibia, injuries consistent with military service but sustained years before death. The skull showed no signs of trauma. Examination of teeth revealed dental work consistent with 1940s German dental practices. Most significantly, forensic analysis detected no bullet wounds, no blade trauma, no evidence of violent death. The hyoid bone was intact, ruling out strangulation. Toxicological testing was impossible given skeletal preservation, but the position of the remains and the scene's overall arrangement suggested Vogel had died while seated at the desk, not in combat. Lieutenant Kessler's remains told a similar story. Male, approximately 170 centimeters tall, aged 25 to 30 at death. The skeleton lay near the entrance shaft in what investigators determined was a deliberate firing position. A carabiner 9.8K rifle still positioned nearby. Like Vogel, Kessler showed no evidence of violent trauma. The cause of death for both men could not be determined definitively from skeletal remains, but the absence of trauma suggested they had died from environmental factors, most likely asphyxiation or hypothermia after the bunker was sealed. The third skeleton, unidentified, lay near the communications equipment. Male, age 30 to 40, no distinguishing skeletal features. This individual was tentatively identified as Jeffreiter Paul Becker, based on process of elimination and the diary's account of 3 men traveling together. The documents recovered from the bunker provided extraordinary context. Vogel's map case contained route maps showing travel from Berlin to Wrocław with handwritten waypoints and dates. The route traced south through Cottbus, then southeast through Graz, entering Silesia north of Wrocław. Handwritten notations indicated overnight stops and checkpoints passed. One notation read April 17, 400, entered Breslau perimeter, facility coordinates as instructed. A separate document typed on Wehrmacht administrative letterhead bore a stamp reading Geheim Kommandosache, secret command matter. This document, dated April 10, 1945, consisted of orders directing Oberst Vogel to proceed to installation BK-7 in Breslau and assume command of document destruction protocols. The orders were signed with an illegible signature and a stamp reading OKH Genstith Orgabt, the Army High Command's organizational department. The leather-bound logbook found on Vogel's desk represented the most detailed primary source. The logbook contained entries dated from April 16th through April 23, 1945, written in Vogel's hand as confirmed by comparison with his archive signatures. The entries documented his journey from Berlin and his activities after reaching Wrocław. The April 16th entry explained his departure. Received sealed orders 0600 hours directing immediate travel to Breslau facility. BK-7 informed Krebs of departure per Corps' summons cover story. Cannot explain true mission due to classification. Departed with Kessler and Becker 0815 hours. Subsequent entries described the journey eastward through deteriorating German-held territory. Encounters with refugees and arrival at a Wehrmacht administrative complex in Wrocław. On April 17th, the logbook revealed that Facility BK-7 was a record storage bunker containing classified personnel files, operational documents, and intelligence materials from various Wehrmacht commands in the Eastern Territories. As Soviet forces advanced, these materials had been consolidated in Wrocław for eventual destruction to prevent capture. Vogel's orders tasked him with supervising the systematic burning of these documents. His April 18th entry noted began document destruction as ordered. 3 truckloads of files burned in facility incinerator. Work proceeds slowly with limited personnel. Soviet artillery audible from eastern approaches, siege tightening. On April 20th, destruction protocols 60% complete. Soviet forces entering city outskirts. Garrison commander orders final evacuation tomorrow dawn, will complete destruction overnight. But the entries for April 21st to 23rd revealed disaster. On April 21st, Vogel wrote, Soviet breakthrough overnight, surface evacuation routes cut. Facility commander and remaining personnel departed through storm drains towards southwestern perimeter. We remain to complete document destruction, now trapped. Entrance shaft collapsed during artillery barrage 1400 hours. Entrance completely blocked, attempted excavation. Impossible with available tools. Attempted radio contact, no response, equipment possibly damaged. April 22nd, secondary exit sealed. Air quality deteriorating, single emergency candle remaining. Kessler and Becker maintaining composure. Completed destruction of remaining classified material as ordered, though rescue now appears unlikely. If these words are found, we did our duty. The final entry dated April 23rd consisted of a single sentence written in increasingly unsteady hand. 3rd day, air running out. Forensic analysis of the bunker's atmosphere confirmed this account. The entrance shaft's collapse had created an airtight seal. The bunker contained no ventilation system adequate for prolonged occupation. Air quality would have deteriorated rapidly with 3 men consuming oxygen in a sealed space of approximately 300 cubic meters. Calculations indicated survivable air would have lasted 48 to 72 hours depending on activity levels. The men had died from asphyxiation, slowly suffocating as oxygen depleted and carbon dioxide accumulated. The bunker had become their tomb, sealed by the same Soviet artillery barrage that destroyed the city above them. The incinerator Vogel used to burn documents had probably accelerated oxygen depletion, consuming available air to feed its flames. Investigation of the bunker's contents revealed the magnitude of Vogel's final mission. Ash residue in a large metal incinerator filled several cubic meters. Analysis of partially burned paper fragments recovered from the ash identified Wehrmacht personnel records, operational orders, intelligence reports, and administrative documents from multiple units. Among the ash, investigators found melted metal clasps from file folders and partially burned security stamps. Vogel had succeeded in destroying the classified materials he'd been sent to eliminate. The irony was brutal. He had completed his mission perfectly, ensuring the documents would never be captured while simultaneously ensuring his own death. The orders that sent him to Wrocław had killed him as surely as any bullet. Dr. Hoffmann, the military historian who had written about Berlin's final defense in 1989, was contacted to provide historical analysis. Reviewing the recovered documents, Hoffmann concluded that Vogel's orders represented standard procedure for the Wehrmacht's final collapse. As military units disintegrated, rear echelon officers were routinely tasked with destroying classified materials to prevent Soviet intelligence from capturing sensitive information. The Army High Command, issued thousands of such orders in April 1945. Most officers completed these tasks and either evacuated successfully or were captured. Vogel's case was unusual only in that he became trapped by circumstance. The sealed bunker preserved evidence that would normally have been lost. Hoffman noted that dozens or perhaps hundreds of similar cases likely occurred, officers dying while executing final duties but simply unrecorded as the German military command structure collapsed completely. Heinrich Vogel did not die defending Berlin as his family believed. He died executing a classified administrative task, burning paperwork in a basement 800 kilometers from his assigned post while the Red Army destroyed the city above him. The truth was simultaneously more mundane and more tragic than the heroic death his widow imagined. He died doing his duty as he understood it, following orders, completing his mission, maintaining discipline even as everything collapsed around him. The logbook's final entries reveal a man who knew death was approaching but continued to execute assigned tasks with methodical determination. On April 22, hours before his death, he completed destruction of the final classified documents, then wrote in his log, "Mission accomplished, no regrets." The question that haunted investigators was why the entrance shaft was never cleared after the war. Soviet forces captured Wrocław on May 6, 1945, after a brutal siege lasting nearly 3 months. The city was devastated, with approximately 70% of buildings damaged or destroyed. Soviet military authorities established control and began systematic clearing operations. But with thousands of bunkers, cellars, and fortifications throughout the city, systematic exploration of every underground space was impossible. The bunker Vogel died and held no strategic value. It contained no ammunition, no weapon stockpiles, no significant military equipment. To Soviet forces conducting post-battle clearing operations, a collapsed bunker entrance simply indicated a structure already destroyed or abandoned. The entrance was not deliberately sealed by Soviet action. The artillery barrage that trapped Vogel was targeting German positions throughout the district, not this specific location. It was simply a random shell impact that happened to collapse the shaft. Post-war Polish authorities focused on reconstruction and resettlement. The city's German population was expelled between 1945 and 1947. Polish settlers moved into buildings and apartments abandoned by departing Germans. Wartime damage was repaired where possible, and rubble was cleared to permit new construction. Small sealed bunkers like BK-7 were often simply left buried. Exposing and properly clearing them required resources that post-war Poland, devastated by 6 years of war and occupation, simply lacked. The decision was made repeatedly across hundreds of sites. If the bunker was sealed and posed no immediate danger, cover it and build above it. Documentation of these decisions was minimal. City plans noted wartime structures below in many locations without specifying details. BK-7 became a note on an engineer's drawing, then a line in a planning document, then forgotten entirely as decades passed and administrative records were archived or lost. What surprised investigators most was the mission's timing. Vogel received orders on April 10, 1945, 6 days before the final Soviet assault on Berlin began. The Army High Command was still attempting to execute administrative protocols even as strategic collapse was obvious to everyone. The orders sending Vogel to Wrocław were issued when Wrocław itself was already besieged by Soviet forces, essentially unreachable from Berlin except by extraordinary effort. The bureaucratic absurdity was stunning. Sending an officer on an 800-kilometer journey through collapsing German lines to destroy paperwork in a city already cut off and awaiting capture. Yet Vogel attempted the mission, reached his destination, and completed his assigned task. Whether this represented admirable dedication or tragic obedience remained a matter of interpretation. One question remained unanswered. Why did Vogel accept the mission? His logbook entry stated he received sealed orders classified as secret command matter. But those orders tasked him with document destruction, not combat operations. They carried no requirement for personal execution. A Wehrmacht Oberst commanding a rear echelon unit in Berlin could have delegated such a task or simply reported it impossible given the military situation. Nothing in the recovered orders suggested consequences for refusal. Vogel chose to go. Dr. Hoffman suggested two possibilities. First, professional military culture. An officer receives orders and executes them without question. This mindset, ingrained through years of service, might have overridden rational assessment of the mission's impossibility. Second, escape. Faced with Berlin's imminent destruction and likely Soviet captivity, the orders provided legitimate cover for leaving the city. Whether Vogel intended to complete the mission or planned to desert further west using the orders as justification cannot be determined. His logbook suggests he took the mission seriously, but the question remains unknowable. The German War Graves Commission took custody of all three sets of remains in June 2024. DNA analysis conducted using bone samples confirmed Vogel's identity through comparison with genetic material from his living descendants. Both daughters had died, but 3 grandchildren provided reference samples. Franz Kessler was identified similarly through his brother's grandson. Paul Becker could not be positively identified as no living relatives were located, but circumstantial. Evidence from the diary and the scene's context made his identity virtually certain. All 3 men were buried with military honors in a German War Graves Commission cemetery near Wroclaw on September 15, 2024. Vogel's daughters never learned their father's true fate. Both had died before his discovery, but his grandchildren attended the ceremony. The bunker itself was documented completely, then filled with concrete and sealed permanently beneath the shopping complex's foundation. Polish authorities considered preserving it as a memorial site, but determined the costs and engineering challenges outweighed the historical value. A small plaque in the shopping complex's entrance plaza commemorates the discovery, noting in Polish and German that 3 Wehrmacht soldiers who died completing their final orders in April 1945 were found and properly buried, nearly 8 decades later. The recovered documents, including Vogel's logbook, were divided between the German Federal Military Archives and the Institute of National Remembrance in Warsaw. They are available to researchers. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of Vogel's fate is its essential randomness. He did not die in combat. He did not die making a heroic last stand. He died because an artillery shell happened to hit near his position at the moment it would trap him. A 100-meter difference in the shell's trajectory and he would have completed his mission, evacuated, and possibly survived the war. His death was fundamentally meaningless in military terms. His mission accomplished nothing strategically. His loss affected no battle's outcome. His sacrifice served no purpose except administrative completeness. He died maintaining bureaucratic procedures in a regime that had days left to exist. Yet he died with dignity, following his orders to the end and recording his final hours with remarkable composure. In an era when millions died in industrial slaughter, Heinrich Vogel's death was both utterly typical and uniquely preserved. One man doing his duty in a sealed room while the world ended above him. The discovery in Wroclaw reminds us that war's final accounting is never truly complete. Decades after the guns fell silent, new stories emerge from beneath rubble and earth. Each discovery adds another fragment to our understanding of those final chaotic days. Vogel's story is not unique in its tragedy. Thousands of officers died in similar circumstances during the Third Reich's collapse, following orders that made no strategic sense, completing missions that accomplished nothing, trapped by circumstances beyond their control. What makes Vogel's case remarkable is only that it was preserved, that his final words survived to tell us exactly what happened. Most similar stories vanished completely, leaving only names on casualty lists and families wondering what really happened in those final days. The bunker beneath the shopping complex in Wroclaw held its secrets for nearly 80 years. The 3 men who died there became statistics, names on lists, memories that faded as loved ones aged and died. The truth of their final mission remained. Buried until construction workers broke through concrete and found answers nobody knew were missing. For Vogel's grandchildren, the discovery brought closure mixed with sorrow. Their grandfather did not die defending Berlin as family tradition held. He died following orders to destroy paperwork, trapped underground while the war he served ended without him. Whether that truth is better or worse than the imagined heroic death is a question each family member must answer for themselves. The story of Oberst Heinrich Vogel, Lieutenant Franz Kessler, and Jeff writer Paul Becker is now complete. 3 men who traveled 800 kilometers across a collapsing Reich to burn documents in a bunker, who completed their mission and died for it, who maintained military discipline to the very end. Their story is simultaneously tragic and mundane, heroic and pointless, a perfect encapsulation of war's final madness. The plaque in the shopping complex entrance notes their sacrifice without judgment. It states simply that they were found, identified, and buried with honors. Shoppers pass it daily, most without stopping to read the inscription. Life continues above the sealed bunker, as it always does. The dead are remembered briefly, then the living move on. This is how history works. We uncover fragments, piece together stories, honor the dead, and continue forward. Vogel's logbook sits now in an archive, available to researchers who want to understand those final desperate days. His final words, mission accomplished, no regrets, speak across 8 decades. Whether those words represent dedication, delusion, or simply a soldier's acceptance of fate remains open to interpretation. What is certain is that 3 men died doing their duty as they understood it, following orders to the end, and their story deserves to be told.